I get to choose the way I act, the way I respond to stimuli, the emotions I feel. If I'm going to design myself to be the perfect iteration of myself, who am I designing and what am I optimizing for?
Scratch Entrepreneur. True stories of remarkable people who dropped everything to turn an idea into a healthy, profitable business. Hey, this is Jeremy Goodrich. I'm the owner of Shine Insurance Agency and your host for the Scratch Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm here today with Simone and Malcolm Collins. These two folks have an interesting, amazing story, a lot of intelligent conversation going on. They are the owners of, among other things, the Travelmax business, which is a high-end wholesaler of travel, and you're going to talk a little bit about that. They're venture capitalists, or at least have been, and they are authors of the book, The Pragmatist Guide to Life. And I like the second part, the subtitle of, a guide to creating your answers to life's biggest questions. Simone and Malcolm, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having us.
It is wonderful to be here.
Sweet. So I want to ask kind of a personal question to start off. You all have an interesting history of your relationship with one another, not only your meeting, but other, like your proposal. And Malcolm, I wondered, you had a very modern way of proposing to Simone. And I wondered if you could tell us the story of that.
I know that a lot of people, they wake up, they read the New York Times, or they go to a sports game that's important to her. My wife was obsessed with a website that back then wasn't as popular as it is today, but Reddit. And so I thought, okay, how do I make my proposal to her hit sort of, my version of the plane flying over the sports stadium for her? And I go, well, there's all of these, nerdy sub-communities, and there's sub-communities that we have associations with in that we are total nerds. So I just took like a bunch of fan communities and then had art commissioned of me proposing to her within the art styles of these various cartoons or animes or sort of online series or whatever. I surprised her with that on Reddit. It did really well. It went viral. It was like a thing for a while, like one of those things that was known on Reddit, like the safe or whatever. But we ended up seeing that it had gained a lot of traction and appealed to people. And we're like, oh, maybe we can make money with this, because that's the way we see everything in life. I desperately wanted to find a way to have our wedding sponsored. That was another one of our things. We weren't famous enough then, but we will be famous enough when we die. So I demand sponsorship of my funeral. I want logos on the coffin.
Proposing that way says a couple of things. One, that you guys are real connected with the digital community, and I know that you are. And it seems like you guys, for whatever reason, kind of happen to be on front ends of things that happen. Do you feel that way too, like early on Reddit and things of that nature?
I feel like we're always 10 steps behind, to be honest, and more so than ever. But maybe that's one of those issues of when you know more, you feel like you know less. I'm not sure. It's hard for us to say.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's so many communities that I've seen where if you'd gotten in at the right time, it's really easy to build up a huge following and sustain that following. I mean, a few of those would be like YouTube and Twitch and even podcasts. But if you come in today, it's a lot harder. And we never got into one of those kinds of snowbally communities early enough. I guess we try to stay on whatever's the cutting edge of things, because that's always where there's profit to be made. And that's what we're looking for.
When we had a startup, we went through an accelerator called 500 Startups. And they took us through a marketing boot camp, one of their managing partners, all of these startups going through the accelerator. And one of their biggest lessons to us was to play the online platform Arbitrage game. They talked about how early on, I think it was Airbnb, used Craigslist, abusing their terms, but used them to list their rooms until Craigslist banned them. But it got them that initial push they needed because no one was using the platform in that way. So they just tried to inspire us or give us encouragement to find some way in which we could exploit, either fairly or unfairly, a rising platform or a popular platform in a way that can profit whatever startup we're running.
Oh, yeah. We actually did that at one point. I mean, I can't talk about what platform this was, but we abused it so hard, we accidentally shut the site down and they had to change their terms of service.
Yeah, but that's from the Silicon Valley startup perspective, a sign that you've won. If you are getting...
No, it's not. That was a mistake. What I should have done is kept it. It wasn't a popular enough site yet. I could have run that harvesting operation a lot longer.
Yeah, I mean, you want to play it as long as you can, but it's still.
I just didn't know how scrapers worked yet, and I set up too many locations.
Well, but you make the point that the startup community and the technology community in general, the rules, it's a little bit more wild, wild westy, right? So whereas in other business communities, breaking the rules has maybe higher levels of consequences, in the startup community, breaking the rules is kind of the basic premise of what everyone's trying to do, right?
Yeah, like you can't win without breaking the rules.
Yeah, I mean, so we're in the travel industry, right? When we look at the startups that have made, billions of dollars in our industry, like Uber and Airbnb, I mean, they're basically illegal operations. They're still illegal operations. They are, let's say, at best, legally super gray area. Mm-hmm. And in many of the cities they operate, they're really operating at a bit over the bounds of the gray area. And that's the way a lot of people are playing the game these days. And we definitely play it much more safe than that. I mean, we try to stay strictly out of the gray area, but on the border.
Well, and it's interesting. So, like, to take it to insurance, which is something I understand. Obviously, lots of people are trying to take tech into insurance, sort of break insurance and do an Uber or do something like that. And there's some interesting ideas of how people are doing that. And so then from my side, where I'm all about it, like I'm totally into it. As I watch people, trying to break through it, it's like, cool, I'm down to be with that. At the same time, from the inside of the existing scenario, I'm like, I don't think it's going to happen in this industry until they get, and then 3 or 4 things that I think people aren't getting yet. In some industries, like the taxi industry, it was a little easier for Uber to just be like, what if we use people's cars? Disruption works sometimes and is harder to make happen other times.
Yeah, I mean, so when you're asking about industries where people may not be seeing the areas for arbitrage, a big thing that we are both involved in, I was a VC, I was a director of strategy at the #1 early stage firm in South Korea, and she was a VC in the UK. And right now, the majority of our employees, and we have a couple offices in Peru, so we're often working outside of the US and seeing different cultures. And I really think that right now, when I'm looking around the world and I'm like, where do I see these huge areas for arbitrage? Where are things being done really inefficiently? It is, I think, a developing country first approach would be the one I would use. I mean, if I was a first-time entrepreneur right now.
Huh. So that you would actually build it in a developing country first?
Yes, focused on fixing developing country problems, but I wouldn't go for just any developing country. So there's a few developing countries I think are really bad to build businesses in. India, for example, terrible. The market's way overcapitalized, and it's like 30 different cultures within the same market. Whereas Latin America, I think, is fantastic because it's really easy to move between markets because they all speak Spanish. Culturally, they're much more aligned than even 2 cities in India would be aligned, and it allows for a much faster and better spread. And I don't think that there's as much cultural distance, but you just don't see as many startups there. And I think one of the reasons is because there's so few countries that feel like safe bets to put money into.
Well, yeah, and I think Latin America, as far as developing economies, it's linear in the way that you just described, but also is in a certain developmental place in some ways. Like you see that with even grains and types of farming assets where, they've come into the world market in the last 30, 40 years, whereas the United States, for example, has been there for 60, 70 years. And so like a similar type of growth, they're coming into being more of a powerhouse. And so that's a great place to be because you're hitting them right at the beginning of being in those powerhouse spaces. Maybe I'm on the same track as you. Maybe I'm not.
No, absolutely. And I think that you'd be surprised by how many services that you may think are like mainstream within our countries are just, non-existent within these countries and would be very easy to build up within, just like basic financial services.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have a lot of listeners that are in the startup world. From a VC perspective, what are 2 or 3 things that folks can really do to present their business well?
A lot of it comes down to not telling the story of what makes you excited and passionate about the business, and instead explaining to investors how you're going to make them money. And the problem is that we get a lot of pitches that are, about the vision and about how cool the product or service is. And I am totally with that. But what I really want to see is, are you profitable now? Are you going to make me money? What are your margins like? And what is your exit plan? And we made the same mistake. I'm completely saying that we did the same thing when we had a startup. But if instead we had come as entrepreneurs to our investors saying, here are our profit margins now, here's what we need to do to get to the next level, here's the tests that we've run to validate that our plan is going to work, and here's how much you're going to make with our exit, even if it was complete bullshit, it would have been very effective.
Too often entrepreneurs, when they come to pitch to us, and we're very different than other VCs, but I would also say I think we do much better than the industry. I mean, just now, because we still do VC investing ourselves, if we hear any sort of like wide interconnected vision of how this is all going to look once it's successful, I basically tune out then. Or if it sounds sexy or overly interesting, when somebody comes to me with something that I just think is the most boring thing ever, I'm like, okay, this is something that I find interesting.
Well, especially if it's a boring thing that fixes a market inefficiency that we know exists. Then we're like, wow, okay, this is great.
Or, and I think something that people stay away from is they're like, there's already companies in this space. I love that. And that was
right. That's a sign that it's going well. Yeah.
Yeah. When we first started entrepreneurship, we thought we had to have a new idea. And I don't really think that if somebody comes to me and they're like, I want to do a landscaping business and I think I could do it like 5% cheaper than the current players because of X and Y, and I've been in the industry for a few years, I'm like, on it. This is fun. And that's the sort of thing that we want to hear. But I also, one of the big problems that people have pitched to us, I'd say in the past couple of weeks have really annoyed me with, is they do not talk about the negatives that much anymore. They just get way too salesman-y. And I want to hear, 40% negatives, 60% positives, not like one or two token negative things.
So the bottom line is you want real, you don't want to be sold to. If you feel like what's presented to you by an entrepreneur is their best perspective on what the reality is of their pitch or their business, you're going to listen better than if someone comes in with too much passion and too much sales.
Well, that was much more articulate than the way I put it, but yes.
Well, interestingly, we feel the same way about people and the way that people present themselves. It really comes down to three things. You need clear upsides, clear downsides, and predictability. And so even when we talk about being a more successful person, more successful leader, salesman, whatever, person in general, you need to not only have something that's really cool about you, a couple things that are really awesome, but some clear downsides so people don't feel like, well, first off, if someone has to guess what's wrong with you, they're not going to come up with 10 different things. They know exactly what's wrong with you.
And we talk about this a lot in our book, and we think that this is one thing, where you can really see this play out at sort of at a statistical level is the political stage. And the candidates in the last few elections that have really captured public attention have typically been the ones that broadcast their negatives very loudly.
Yeah, whereas those who are just perfect... Well,
not perfect, but because nobody believes that people don't have major flaws, so then they make up flaws about them, and they're usually much worse than the flaws that people broadcast about themselves.
Mm-hmm. And the whole point of this is to be a predictable entity. And humans, whether they're investment prospects or products or other people, potential friends, potential hires, they want predictability. What's going to happen with you? What's going to go wrong? Even if something goes wrong, it's okay, as long as it's predictable.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And we're going to take a break right now, and then we're going to come back. And I want to dig into the book a little bit, if that's okay. We've kind of started to go there with what people want, how people behave, and what people want from not only the world around them, what they see from the other side of people or businesses or politics, but also what they want from themselves. And I think you address both of those things in your books, and we're going to talk about that when we come back. So we're back with Simone and Malcolm Collins. Thank you two so much for being with us today.
We're having such a blast.
Sweet. So let's dig into your book a little bit. I've thought about different ways that I want to get into it. And probably the best way is just to turn it over to you to talk about it a little bit. Well, here's my first question. What's a pragmatist?
It is the antithesis of an idealist or a tribalist. If you look at our society today, if we see sort of the creeping evil that's eating our society, it is idealism of various political spectrums. It creates the mentality of I'm right and you're evil. And anything that challenges my worldview or the utopia I'm trying to create is evil. Or tribal groups where it becomes, truth becomes a team sport. and you cheer when a tragedy happens because it can be spun to your side's advantage. That's what we're fighting against. We want a more practical approach to life, but we take that to a almost absurd extreme in the book and within our own lives. The whole way we live life is we're like, I get to choose who I am. I get to choose the way I act, the way I respond to stimuli, the emotions I feel. If I'm going to design myself to be the perfect iteration of myself, who am I designing and what am I optimizing for? And that's what the book tries to go over without biasing people towards a specific outcome. And because the book is produced by a nonprofit that we run, because, we actually believe this is an important thing in society these days. We only sell it for 99 cents. And then all the money goes to nonprofits. And it comes with a free audiobook.
Well, and I think you do a great job of early on, and I think, Simone, you wrote the introduction talking about this idea of tribalism and idealism and the fact that it really does run so much of human nature and that it doesn't have to. And when we step back a little bit and look at, take a pragmatic approach, then we can kind of see ourselves in a different way and we can kind of see the world in a different way. Am I interpreting that wrong?
Absolutely. You're interpreting it correctly. I feel like we've reached a junction in society with the extent to which we've evolved technologically, in which there's this dichotomy between the meat puppet animal that we're all operating and our prefrontal cortices. So we have this part of us that's very advanced with conscious thought, and we're able to logically think, here's what's in my best interest, and here's the plan I should build. And then this animal that part of our brain is driving is like, no, I'm hungry. I'm going to eat right now.
But the worst part, what's really dangerous about this is it's we used to all be sort of individual computers running separate from a network.
Yeah.
And then now, within the past few generations, people connected that network all together. And these really simple thoughts and ideas that are really simple virus programs are now able to spread faster. They're now able to sort of evolve against our mental defenses faster. And they are really eating the population. They are taking away people's ability to think critically because this part of our brain, this higher order part of our brain that Simone is talking about, we don't like it. We don't like thinking that much. We get up from watching our TV and we put on headphones and we listen to music, and then we listen to music all the way to work, and then we do simple tasks all day. I mean, the moments of the day in which we actually take the time to be lucid are really rare, and they're not exactly pleasant.
Well, and I've heard one neuroscientist describe the prefrontal cortex as the part of our brain that tells us to do the right thing that's hard to do, that we don't necessarily want to do. So it's easy. It's so easy to just.
But these simple ideas present us with ammunition to shut that off.
Exactly. Well, and I think the way that social media has been optimized has made it very easy for us to override it.
I look at it a lot where there's my own intellect and then my own animal. And the animal inside me, like you were saying, Simone, has sort of certain perspectives and certain ideas and maybe tends to be a little more tribal and protective and more about, just a certain and a more basic approach. And then the intellectual side of me feels more evolved and more able to look at the world in a pragmatic perspective and step back and say, well, I may feel like this is the right thing to do, but actually this is the right thing, or I may, see this tribal side. So I guess a criticism of the intellectual perspective, which I feel like you guys represent and certainly connects with me, is that it kicks the animal out or doesn't accept the animal. What are your thoughts on that?
So, I'd love to expand upon something you said there or pull apart, I think, a mistake that a lot of people make. They think that the moral side of them, their moral arguments, are coming from the intellectual side of their brain. And we would argue that's really not the case. Sometimes they are, but often it's the animal side of our brain that's making these moral arguments. There's this great video you can find that's from a TED Talk where there's a monkey and it sees it's getting cucumbers in reward for a task, and it's really happy. And then it sees the monkey next to it get grapes in reward for the same task, and it just goes nuts and starts throwing the cucumbers at the researcher, and it's just not having it anymore because many of the things that we think are sort of higher order thought pathways, such as fairness, are actually the animal parts of our brain that we have allowed ourselves to convince that they have some higher order. And when I talk about this, I could talk, why is fairness of intrinsic value? Why is fairness such an important thing in our society? And people would say, oh, well, when the world is fairer, people are more happy. And it's like, well, have you looked for evidence of that? Have you looked at research on that? That research might be out there. And if you haven't looked at that,
how do you know it's true?
How do you know it's true? But it's such a core point of your worldview. It's such a core part of how you view the world. Yet you have never questioned it at all because society hasn't provided you with any sort of framework to question that.
But to add to that, I think some people decide in the end, and a big part of our book is helping people decide what has inherent value and what they want to maximize in their lives for themselves, without someone saying, here's what you should do. It should be this thing. It should be serving God. It should be being happy. It should be helping others. You decide for yourself, and you can totally decide
to feed the animal.
Yeah, you want to feed the animal. But the thing is, the animal is really bad at taking care of itself. The animal's like, well, I'm just going to do cocaine because that feels really good. And then the rest of your life is miserable. And you have to, so even if your highest goal is to serve this animal, you have to be pragmatic about it. And sometimes to deny the animal in the short term to give it a long-term good life.
That's such a great point. If you just let the animal run you, it won't optimize for itself. And that's the problem with the animal, is even if your goal is to optimize the animal, it can't optimize itself. You need to say, how about we don't do the heroin today?
Well, it's the problem of modern society. The animal was evolved to operate in a hunter-gatherer kind of tribal society, in which case all of those adaptations it has to eat as much sugar as it can, to rest as much as it can, to not think as much as it can. Those are really good.
To flip out at somebody when they do something that like undermines you within your social
life. Yeah, those are great.
Yeah, the cop rolls down your window and the animal's saying, yell at him, curse him out, throw something at him.
Well, and it's like the yin and the yang. Everything to the extreme becomes problematic. There's probably some example of where I'm wrong about that, but almost everything to the extreme becomes a problem, and that's where you balance it. The second point you make in the book is about the idyllic tree, or, like how you set up your purpose. And I think this idea of setting up purpose has a value in that it's very unlikely that you put on your purpose tree as you're coming up with your best self, I want to do cocaine every day. It's like not something that you set as your structural foundation, right? And so if you're setting that structural foundation, you're unlikely to put things that are actually bad for you on there, which then kind of creates a map that is much maybe more balanced anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And you say, the first point in the book is, what are you trying to maximize with your life? And the second point is this ideological tree we talk about, like, what are your set of hypotheses for maximizing that? And cocaine would be a perfect one. You could say, I want to be as happy as I can in my life. I want like maximum positive emotions. And then a hypothesis could be just do a bunch of cocaine, but it's a bad hypothesis. And there's lots of things you can look at in your environment that say, here's evidence that that's a bad hypothesis. Here's evidence that that's a bad hypothesis. And so few people test these hypotheses for how they want to maximize whatever it is they're choosing to maximize.
From a true pragmatic perspective, you have to try your hypotheses and then decide if they're correct and adjust from there.
And they should change. We've changed our ideologies, our hypotheses on how to maximize what we value often after we get better information. And the idea that people should have these fixed morals or fixed ideas about how to live life that don't change is quite problematic.
Yeah. So we've touched a lot on how we build our internal character from a pragmatic perspective. We didn't talk about how we present our character to others. You describe it as sort of a video game box, and I wonder if you could describe that a little bit and maybe expand on that.
So this is something we were talking a little bit about at the beginning of the first stage of this interview, which is people say, when I say, you got to control how people see you. Like, how do you want people to see you? And they go, I just want people to see me for who I am. Even if somebody could read your mind for like the past 6 hours straight, even if they've been reading every thought you had, they probably wouldn't have that good of an idea of who you are. And in reality, in the past months, you've maybe had 1 or 2 humans dedicate more than an hour of time to thinking about you.
But the metaphor you use.
Yeah, the metaphor I use, the box art one is, it's sort of like you go to a programmer and you say, what are we going to put on the cover of our game box? And he goes, I want to put the game code. Because that's what the game really is. And you go to a store and it's just a bunch of game code and it all looks the same. What people care about is how is this game different from other games? What's unique about it? What are the selling points? And how is it going to fit into my life? What is my experience with this game going to be? And that's the way you should sell yourself to the world.
So you're presenting yourself completely differently than maybe you're pinning yourself as a human being. So the way that you sell yourself to other people is different than. So what are a couple of tips on how those two things are different?
Well, you can consider everyone else in your life. We all sort of see ourselves as the protagonist and everyone else as a supporting character or an extra. I love this concept called Sonder, in which you kind of just realize that you are an extra in everybody else's life. And it's just, the world is so vast and big. Just try to be a very good extra in other people's lives. You have to be simple. You have to be predictable. You have to have upsides and downsides and be a good, bright character that they want. It's simple.
We naturally tend to trying to make ourselves the best protagonist we can be, but in reality, we need to make ourselves the best supporting character we can be.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. It's like we always say, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Well, maybe you should pay more attention to enjoying the fact that you're the bridesmaid and being in that position. And that actually is where happiness, lots of different kinds of happiness come from, lots of different kinds of things, but where some happiness can come from, and enjoy that place that you're at that moment.
Yeah, especially if you're sought after. That's how you know you've won.
So we're going to take one more quick break, and we're going to come back, and I'll just ask you a couple questions, and then we'll be done. Does that sound good?
Sounds awesome.
Yep.
Cool. And we're back with Malcolm and Simone Collins again. Thank you all so much for spending just a little bit of your time with us.
This is so fun.
You know, you guys have been doing VC stuff. You're owner of businesses. You've started businesses and ended those businesses. Now you're the founders of a not-for-profit, and you're authors. Where do you see yourselves in 5 years?
In 5 years, we'll still be in the farming stage. So we're currently batch freezing embryos. We want to have a very large family. So we'll start producing them on an industrial scale. We already have secured property in a developing country where we can raise them cheaply. We'll be trying to accumulate wealth, of course, because that is the easiest way to get optionality for power.
And we'll be utilizing that power to achieve the things that we think have value in the world. And right now, our current hypothesis is spreading sort of our pragmatic ideology and our foundation's message, which means building it up to a sort of self-sustaining level with staff and everything like that.
Huh. So can we dive in a little deeper to the beginning of that description? So you all are going to have multiple children. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, just yesterday I had my 4th extraction surgery. And
we prepaid for 2 more.
Yeah, so we're banking as many embryos as we can now. We want to
While we're still young and genetically fit.
Yeah, we want optionality for at least 7 kids. So we need a lot of PGS tests, basically genetically stable embryos, and it's actually hard to produce them. We really want to rethink the way that people raise families. We read recently, or Malcolm introduced me to this researcher who designed basically engineered genius children, and we'd love to test that method in some different ways on our own children. He created chess champions, which is cool, but like not exactly functional.
What if you just applied that to the stock market or something?
I know, so we're really keen to work on that. And we'd love to build a truly pragmatic family.
These parents raising actor children, they're messing up.
I know. Why are they wasting that?
Is it more of a medical process before birth, like genetic work, or is it more of a process after birth that you're...
Unfortunately, we're not there yet with the genetic stuff. We really want to. I mean, we would love to genetically engineer our children, but the technology just doesn't exist.
It's more about logistics. So if a female, especially, I'm 30, so I'm ancient from a reproductive standpoint. If we want to have 7 kids, by the time we have kids 7, if I do it all naturally, I won't really be able to do it. So we're like, let's just get it out of the way. Let's do all of the embryos now. Let's genetically test them, figure out gender, make sure they don't have any major defects, and then move forward from there.
Yes, and secure property in a location where we can, birth and raise them at scale.
Yes.
Are they all going to be born close to each other? So are you going to have like 7 kids at the same time, or are you going to spread it out? What are you thinking?
No, I mean, we've thought about that, but that would just cost too much. Every surrogate is at least $100,000 or more to do.
That's insane.
And so Simone has a strong personal predilection for bearing them all herself.
Yeah, I'm a control freak, so I'd be really freaked out. Like, well, what are you listening to? What are you eating right now? I mean, I couldn't handle it. So we're going to try to have me, obviously in rapid succession, carry as many of them as possible until my body gives out, and then we'll figure out what to do.
Well, awesome. I mean, interestingly, like that sounds very modern and is kind of very modern, your perspective on it. But a lot of women over the course of time have essentially played that role, very, succession after succession kids. And so there's a historic piece to that that's interesting. So sorry, I got off on that note, but it was just interesting to me and I wanted to go there. But from a business perspective, it sounds like you'll try and do a lot of the things you've done at maybe a little bit more distance from it, maybe. Is that a fair?
So, I mean, our company right now, the largest of the companies we run, Travelmax.com, we provide travel at sort of cheaper prices and you can get it online, and we manage travel for companies. So, if you have entrepreneurs that are staying in a lot of hotels, they're doing a lot of travel, that's really the audience we want to spread amongst the most, because that's one of the audiences that we can provide the most utility to. So anyone who's traveling a lot, and by that I mean like more than 2 or 3 times a year, we can help, especially at the company level, save a lot of money with that.
Yeah, so 5 years from now, we're opening our first regional offices this year. And so 5 years from now, I hope we're, nationwide in our North American business and helping more and more entrepreneurs.
Yeah, so our Dallas office opens in a few days, and then in a few months we'll be opening our Boston, New York office.
Yeah, so hopefully our expansion will have been complete and dominate the world.
World domination.
Travel, because currently no one really offers them helpful services, and there's actually a lot of value to be saved.
So finally here at the very end, take 30 seconds and share with our listeners where they can find you if they'd like to do so.
You can find us at pragmatist.guide. That's the website for the Pragmatist's Guide to Life. You can also search Pragmatist's Guide to Life on Amazon and purchase it at literally the lowest prices we can offer it. And again, any profit that we do glean from that goes to our nonprofit. And if you're interested in having any help with travel whatsoever, visit travelmax.com, or better yet, email us at ceo@travelmax.com and just ask us to help you. We'll comparison shop for you. We'll try to figure out how to save you money and time. It's what we do.
And we're always open to talk. Anybody who's interested.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Malcolm and Simone, thank you so much for, spending a little bit of time with us. Your story is fascinating and your book is wonderful. I'll look forward to hearing in 5 years how it's all going.
Fingers crossed it works well.
Special thanks to Simone and Malcolm Collins for taking the time to share their story with us. Contributors to this episode include me, Jeremy Goodrich, as the host. The music is by my high school buddy, Mark. Vinten and Editing is by editing superhero Christopher Lang, who has absolutely changed the process here at Scratch Entrepreneur. If you enjoyed this podcast, there's a couple of things we need you to do right now. You could start by subscribing to Scratch Entrepreneur on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts. While you're there, please review the show or send me an email and tell me what you love, what you don't love. Feedback is one of the most important parts of this process and how things get better in general, right? But certainly with this podcast, I would love to hear from you. Love to make it a little bit better. I've got thick skin. I can handle what you have to say. If you did enjoy the podcast, please share it with your friends. And finally, please join us on our Scratch Entrepreneur Facebook group. We've got great conversations going on over there and lots of interesting people. So we hope to see you there. Until the next time, have a wonderful day.